Have you ever just scrolled through the endless choices on a streaming platform looking for something that could be interesting? Now, I wasn't sure what I was in the mood for, but I stumbled on a thriller from 2019 called Look Away. In the US, it's currently streaming on Netflix. It stars Jason Isaacs, Mira Sorvino, and India Eisley. So I watched it. Should you? Alienated at home and in high school, a teenage girl finds an unlikely confidant in the mirror and decides to switch places with her sinister reflection. India Eisley stars as Maria. She's an introverted high schooler at a very posh school and lives a very privileged life thanks to her dad's successful cosmetic surgery practice. Now, we're told she's troubled and even depressive, barely having friends, and she's not outgoing in the slightest. As she falls deeper into her loneliness and isolation, she discovers that her reflection has its own persona, pretty much the personality opposite of Maria. It's outgoing and confident. So I enjoyed the themes that this begins to explore within the narrative. There's gaslighting, perfection, control, rebellion, and strength. Maria's parents are played by Jason Isaacs and Mira Sorvino, and they have a dysfunctional and unhealthy relationship, which then shapes how Maria moves through the world. Now, because Isaacs is a cosmetic surgeon, he's obsessed with perfection and perceived beauty, and he expertly just crafts a character who is revolting and lascivious. Just about every time that he was on screen, he made my skin crawl, and he consistently gave off rapey vibes. I mean, he's a cruel man who uses the insecurities of his family to control them and tear them down. And we're not meant to like Isaacs, and he certainly delivers. But with his persona, he becomes pretty one dimensional. He's excellent at being the dirtbag dad whom we hate, but I was never conflicted with his character. I mean, there weren't redeeming moments that would make me wish for anything other than bad things to happen to him. And that's not always a terrible thing. I mean, some stories just need an outright villain. I just think the story would have contained more tension if he wasn't so wholly despicable. More conflicted emotional attachment to his character, then that leads to a stronger third act. Now, Maria has a friend or two at school, but they're not strong friends, especially as we watch how they treat her. There's the typical jealousies and backstabbing that goes on with teenagers, so some progressions feel natural in their unraveling or their buildup. But there's one in particular involving a character named Sean. It comes across as just abrupt and confused, leaving their scene to feel contrived and then obvious. Now, this film borrows ideas and feelings from several other movies. For this, I mean, it's not really a negative, other than the fact that those that it borrows from did all of theirs things just way more effectively. I mean, there's a Carrie-esque moment that involves bullying, and then other aspects resemble Fight Club, Split, and Psycho, where the protagonist is deranged or experiencing instability, but can also be seen as the unreliable narrator since they might be detached from reality. Now, this portion is a good inclusion within the story, but there's an element of the story that's integral to the plot and Maria's behaviors, but it doesn't fully get the definition that it needs. And then within that, the backstory that begins to be told, it is messed up. Now, I love how it influenced the characters to get to their present mindsets, but there's an element within this background that doesn't establish its own rules, meaning they can pretty much do whatever they want within this story arc, even if it doesn't play out logically. Now, for character decisions, some follow a very predictable, unhinged, or disturbed path. But there are a couple that involve some very stupid character moments. For example, Maria is being taught to ice skate by her friend Lily, and they're outside on the ice. Well, some very menacing looks are being passed back and forth. And instead of a character quickly getting out of danger, the scene escalates in a way that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, leading to an outcome that then felt cheap and certainly just unearned. And some additional violent interactions, I think they're decently executed, but if you apply any sort of logic to the grouping of violent events, the progression leaves a huge hole for a perpetrator to get caught. Now, I know that I've been stating a lot of shortcomings and negatives, but something this story does extremely well is with the visuals as Maria interacts with her reflection. As expected, there are times when the reflection it perfectly mirrors the character. Other times when they're moving independently of each other. Now, these work effectively to create unease, and they look pretty flawless. I mean, this isn't the first time this technique is used either, so it's definitely not unique or novel. But for this story and the context, it fits and it complements the storytelling rather than feeling like a gimmick that's then used to convey potential vulnerability within a character. And that could still exist. I mean, like I mentioned before, Maria could be an unreliable narrator, and the mirror effect adds to her uncertain connection with reality. Now, this is an hour and 43 minutes, and despite some small slowness in occasional scenes, the pace is efficient and it didn't drag as a whole. I was actually surprised when the movie was reaching its conclusion because it didn't seem like much time had passed. That's also, though, a shortcoming for the narrative. The final events, they feel very rushed. I mean, there's been a bunch of lead up to this climax. And even though much of it is predictable in its progression, it was building out something that was mildly engaging. And then we're taken through the climax at just breakneck speed, removing any stress or intrigue that happened to be present. So, overall, I appreciate the themes and the darkness of the story, but the execution is very plain and straightforward. There's not any nuance to the potentially unsettling nature at the heart of the plot. When Maria starts communicating with her mirror image, everything from that point on becomes predictable. Some tension is built because of the setups, but there's not enough to classify this as thrilling or chilling. Even the final frame of the movie is completely obvious, choosing a simplified conclusion over something meaningful or haunting. There's sex, a lot of nudity, some profanity, and some brutal violence. I give Look Away 2.5 out of 5 couches. So have you seen any good thrillers lately? I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.